Uh, First of all, I would really like to pat you on the back, Ranjana, you and Nigam. I think this is a fantastic piece of work. I can really imagine the hard work that went into it, and how much it must have meant for you both. I mean, in terms of your own person and the politics, and what all y'all while listening to people's stories. Uh, and over again, the pain that they went through, the state that they are in, what it must have meant for you personally. So thanks a lot. To me, reading this book, I really feel that this book is first and foremost, I think it's about people. It's about, in some ways, a forgotten people, because the way our country is sort of going at full speed towards being, or trying to be, what it calls a super mod power. It reminds me of an elephant in the forest trampling upon ants, hordes and hordes of ants, uh, and not at all thinking about what the existence. I mean, I am for elephants, by the way, but just in terms of a metaphor, that is the kind of the huge calamity. I mean, almost like the way the government has been pushing into these areas, and the state has increasingly become predatory. Because as this the many essays in this book shows to us very graphically, through first-hand accounts, through very deep scholarship, it shows to us how there was initially this feeling, or this argument, like post 1947 in the 50s, about pushing forward a development model, and and the need to sort of go in for this large scale industrialization, because it was good for the country as a whole, and that we needed to develop, and calling upon the people to make these sacrifices, and how many people went for that also. It in fact reminded me of while listening to the hibakushas of Japan, about how even after being bombed, their country persuaded them that we needed nuclear plants, because Japan was so war hit, and that so again going sort of accepting US technology and going for nuclear power plants. And finally, when new hibakushas got created after Fukushima, these same people started feeling that we made a big mistake that time, that we had suffered, but we allowed the start of nuclear power plants in our country. So it's something like that that has happened in our country too, where they said that we needed this kind of a particular kind of a development, that it was for nation building, that it would be for the greater common good. And this is a very good time to actually look back, because from the public sector, post 1990, there is the liberalization, the new economic policies are in place, and how the private sector and the multinationals come in, and how the story gets more and more convoluted. So somewhere I feel that even though, as Professor Mohanty was pointing out, that the movements may not always have met their objectives, but the movements have taken the whole discourse forward in a very big way, and the movements have communicated through lived experiences how this development paradigm just doesn't work. It doesn't work for them. And this whole farce, of that this is necessary for nation building, and so on. I mean, that whole thing is now a charade, and people understand well, what this politics is about dispossession, about accumulation, about making the rich richer, about their, losing control over their lives. However fragile these lives used to be, but they were their lives, and they used to somehow manage to survive, with the little they had. But now, in the name of development, what we see is how this very cruel, elephant has actually not allowed them to survive. I mean, they are now fighting for their survival, And this has all happened in the name of development. So therefore, I think what this book has done is uh, it's in some ways an act of resistance. I mean, it's recording history. It's recording history from below. It's recording the lived life of people, not of 1 or 2 years, but for something like for a stretch of 75 or so years. And it is recording the another history, of our country, powers that we may, wish to ignore, but it is sort of the attempt is to say that people are not going to take this lying down, and people are uh, observing, people are fighting, and the story has certainly not ended here. So what this book does, as far as I mean, to me, is to put people center stage in this whole discourse. It underlines what democracy is not, and it very forcefully says that this development paradigm doesn't work for us. Now, while reading, of course, I was reminded about the many times that this has happened to other people in other states of our country. The Narmada Bachao Andolan was mentioned earlier, and I recall again how in the Narmada Bachao Andolan, when the early evictions were happening, how despite this very wonderful Narmada Water Disputes Tribunal award, the whole law is fantastically in place. It very clearly says that the pari passu approach has to be adopted. The dam height has to, be built, and simultaneously the resettlement and rehabilitation of the people has to be looked into. And how all of this, a lot of this was completely, ignored and not followed. And very worryingly, that even when the court actually proves that, I mean, in the court it is proved, like in 1993, there was this PIL that was filed by late advocate and a highly erudite person whom I greatly respect, human rights activist, lawyer, Girish Bhai Patel. And I had a chance to be part of that PIL when I helped document cases of forced evictions that were happening in the Nanda Valley at the time. And these were the first lot of evictions that were happening. These were the people who were being evicted were people from on the Gujarat side. So they were actually people who were cooperating with the government. They were organizations like the Archwani, was leading them, and they were cooperating with the government. And yet the government did not follow the requirements according to the existing law in place, and a very large majority were forcibly evicted. They were moved into resettlement sites, and again various requirements, like the fact that the standard of living should not decrease from what it was before, that they should get this much amount of land, that the land should all be in one place. I mean, all this, the law is all there in place, but then it's not followed. And then even though in the court, actually we won that case, this was in 1993, and we won that case where the Gujarat High Court very clearly said that yes, post evictions are happening and they should not happen, and so on. It directed the government, it gave fantastic directions. But today that whole judgment has gone into oblivion. Nobody followed it. The state went ahead with whatever, it thought best. And ultimately we see what has happened, that, the dam has got built. And it again reminded me of this, middle-aged Adivasi person who I remember, he said about, जब हम rally में जाते हैं, we feel very strong, but when we come back and we from our homes we see the dam and we see the height increasing, we feel very powerless. And actually that is what has happened, that the government has done everything possible to not heed to its own laws, to break its own laws. The executive has not followed the judiciary, and the court cases have gone on in the Supreme Court, and we all have followed the trajectory. And even though it has been a very brave struggle, and as Professor Mohanty said, that it's, been an example for the whole world. Yet, as far as the people of the Narmada Valley are concerned, the government let them down. There is no doubt about it that the government let them down, that the state was predatory then and the state is predatory now. Everywhere we see, and these are, the tribal tracts mostly, because most of the natural resources are in the tribal tracts, whether it be minerals, whether it be rich forest land, the minor forest produce, and so on. So then ultimately, what we are also therefore talking about are the Adivasis. I mean, while there are other people also who live in these parts, who are also marginalized, who are also exploited, but a very large majority of these people in these regions are Adivasis. And, as we know that the fifth schedule is supposed to function, but it does not in actuality. And in places like Chhattisgarh, for example, we can see how democracy just doesn't work. I mean, if there are basically two main political parties and they think alike, then, the opposition party does not work like an opposition. And in Chhattisgarh, the two main parties like BJP and the Congress, they think alike as far as the economic policies are concerned. And not only as far as economic policies are concerned, as far as policing is concerned, as far as the use of paramilitary and the CRPF is concerned, as far as letting vigilantes loose on the people in these parts just to, meet their targets and so on. So this is therefore not a democracy. And therefore, in somewhere we really need to ask very fundamental questions, because what is also, in these parts, whether it be the MLAs, whether it be the MPs, I mean, they are Adivasis, but then they all belong to different parties, and therefore, they all don't think for the welfare of the Adivasi. And therefore, this whole, we need to therefore, I think when I say fundamentals, we need to therefore rethink about the way the whole electoral system has been also thought about. And these are old debates, and I think we need to also go back to those old debates. And as far as the development of the people is concerned, again, in Bastar also we see, like we have seen in Odisha, like we have seen in other Adivasi areas of the country, that the government is of course focusing on a certain kind of a development. Like, as soon as the word Vikas comes, they'll start talking about schools and health and so on, roads, electricity. Now, not that all this is not necessary. Of course, all this is also necessary. But then you have to talk about the basics, no? Like, you have to talk about land, you have to talk about forest, you have to talk about resources, rivers, and you have to talk about people's control over that. You have to talk about the fact that the government is supposed to listen to these people. According to the existing laws of this country, the government is supposed to listen to these people. There is a PESA Act, there is a Forest Rights Act, and each of these acts have, we know the long history behind these acts. These acts did not, come to the people easily. And yet, we find that the governments do not follow these acts. PESA is not followed. Gram Sabhas do not happen. And when they happen, there are fake Gram Sabhas. There are all kinds of fake environmental clearances. I mean, we have seen it in Bastar, whether it be in Lohandigooda with Tata Steel, or in Bela, Kirandul area with NMDC, including the new effort to take up a new mountain. And then in Nagarnar, in Bastar, we are seeing how from public sector, they are now going towards private sector, and it's out, I mean, anybody can buy Nagarnar. So in the sense that there are existing laws, I mean, this is again a very common experience that all of us have in our different parts of our country, that despite existing laws in place and laws which people fought for, there was great suffering, there were great human sacrifices, behind that, and people fought for these laws, and then you find that these laws are just not implemented, and then you don't know where to go. You go to the judiciary, and then again, nothing happens, or at least at the local level in the district courts. I mean, most of these issues, of course, have to be taken up in the high courts and the Supreme Court, because at the district court cannot take up these issues. But even in the district court, you see that in any case, I mean, this is a feature where you keep postponing, you keep getting hearings, and justice continuously gets delayed. I mean, years just don't matter. While there are people, hanging on to your decisions, they are waiting for you, to give them justice. So this is the very bleak picture in some ways. And like in Odisha, where, people waged very brave battles. And for those of us who have been watching Odisha from outside, I always feel so strongly about this, that all the time when the state makes a big thing out of people, you use arms to fight for the rights. The state makes a big thing out of violence when people use violence. But what about when people have, fought with non-violence? Did you listen to them? And the answer is no, they did not. They trampled upon them. They again opened their guns and they shot people down, like they have shot people down in Kalinganagar and other parts. In Jharkhand, they have shot people down, in Koilkaro and other parts. And in Bastar, of course, I mean, in places where there is a strong Maoist movement, a strong armed movement, even though you may push people into violence in the first place, then you get a very good excuse that, these are extremists, these are, violent people, we need to bring them to line. And then you again use thousands of CRPF and paramilitary who are themselves people from very poor background. And, in some ways you unleash them on them and with impunity. And again, laws are not followed and without due process. So, and of course you have, these black laws in place like UAPA, and you have state laws, as you all know. I mean, we have CSPSA, Chhattisgarh Special Public Security Act in Chhattisgarh. Similarly, other states have their own such very special kind of acts or laws which give special power to the police, as though police needs special power, because in any case, it's a completely unaccountable force in the country, whether or not, Maoists may be there or not. In state after state, we have seen that to be the case, that even filing a single FIR is a very big struggle. So I think I'm not saying anything new. I think all of us know these things. We know that we are dealing with, in this democracy. I mean, we want democracy. We want democracy to succeed. I certainly do. I think that amongst all the very many systems of governance that are available in the world all over, I think democracy is something which we really need to make, that it should work. But then the basic premise of the democracy is that there has to be a basic respect, a basic level of responsibility, a basic respect for law, and so on. And if these basics are not met, then it is very difficult for true democracy to actually function. And then naturally, I mean, people who have sacrificed, who are suffering, who are hurting, who are dying, they are in the midst of violence. Somebody had once used an analogy. It's like a tongue in between the teeth, like you're in the midst of violence. So they may resort to violence, and then, there is more violence. So then even that becomes a spiral, and so on. And then in places like Bastar, because they have used their, very cunning means to divide people, where you see villages which are now divided. Some who may be with the insiders, and those who are for various reasons joined hands with the police. And now the state, of course, is also using, they have made the first CRPF battalion of Adivasis. Even those who surrender or may want to come out of Maoism, again, they are used to form a force like the District Reserve Guards, which is full of mostly surrendered, Maoists. And of course, it is, anybody will ask that, where is the justice in this? That, I mean, this person has chosen to give up the gun and has come out, and the state or a responsible government should help them to now lead normal lives, should give them skills, should help them. But instead, what we find is that just because they may have some intelligence, intelligence in the sense they may have information, and they are used to the area, so therefore the state takes these shortcuts. It is easier for them to operate with these people and through them. But as a result, you see that homes are broken, villages are broken. The whole society is torn asunder, and this is a very serious thing. And all this in the name of the people. They're trying to protect you. Much before all this started. I mean, at least the Adivasis could go to the forest with freedom. But today, you may be going to collect wood in the forest or maua or something else, and you can be accosted there. You can be put behind, you can be put in illegal custody for days on end, even though there may be the 24 hours, requirement to be produced before the magistrate. But who cares? I mean, nobody is looking, and nobody will tell. So you can put them, in your custody, and when the next chance arrives, you can bring a photographer and you can let that person pose with a lot of ammunition around that person and show that this person is a Maoist, while all along that person was in your custody. Somewhere, I think we need to therefore fight on so many different grounds and at so many different levels. So, for example, in Odisha, I noted in the book, it was written and about how some mass organizations were named as Maoist fronts. Lately, we know that many of our colleagues and people whom we have known for decades, like Father Stan Swami, for example, who was the latest arrest in the Bhima Koregaon case. Even though, I mean, their work has been completely Father Stan Swami's work in Jharkhand is older than Jharkhand itself. He's been there for decades. And whatever he's been working, whether it be for land rights or against dispossession and so on, it's been all in the public domain. And he gets persecuted for, in some ways, in my view, for the last 3 years, when he along with others started taking the issue of the under trials in Jharkhand. They did a survey, and this was under the banner of persecuted prisoners or something. Some kind of a campaign group or organization had been built around this. And this is a public, completely legal activity. So not only do they want to put people behind bars illegally, but they don't want anybody to question it either. So therefore you have these under trials. And I'm not saying that this under trial story begins only now, as far as with the Maoists in the picture. No, I mean, Jharkhand itself had this very, this story of this person who was for 25 years this was I think in the 70s, late 70s, 25 years or so as an under trial, who even after release did not want to now come out because there was no other world that person could go to. So through the story of the under trials, we know the drawbacks of the criminal justice system. So in a sense, so we see that how Father Stan is persecuted, for his role in this persecuted prisoners campaign group, and for his educational activity, where he was educating people, educating youngsters through Bagija. So in a sense, there are all these linkages, and where non-violence may be always touted and shown to be the ideal thing, but you can see that how the state itself pushes people to violence. And then once the violence, once people do take up arms, or even stones for that matter, as in Kashmir we have seen, then no distinction is drawn, whether it's whatever it may be, stones or whatever. And then there is this whole spiral of targeting people, and of course, I mean, not only targeting, but burning entire villages, and with no respect for any law in place. So at the end of the day, I can only say that I think this book goes a very long way. It's a book which is holding the hands of the people It's a book where the authors are walking with the people. And in my view, this is what, this is the kind of scholarship I really respect. And the history, or the history writing that I also feel I really respect. So again, I would really like to say that we need to take this kind of work forward together, hopefully continue to evolve ways of fighting this state, and to keep saying that, as that song, no, that gaon chodab nahi, jungle chodab nahi. So that this, this land is ours, and this country is ours, and this democracy is also ours. So these are the things that we have to keep fighting for, to keep defining and contesting. And I think this book goes a very long way in doing that. Thank you.